So, dry yeast. I decided it was the good, the bad, the ugly because I brewed a bunch of beers and I was bringing them no matter how they turned out. Um, for some reason, and I think I figured it out where, but I've been using potassium metabisulfite for dechlorinating, and I realized I just began really wild and crazy, just throwing a whole bunch in there. I'm like, oh yeah, that adds sulfites or sulfates, whatever. But I think that affects beer. But anyway, we're gonna get some beers going. So topics covered. But wait, what's first pour our beer? Patrick, Todd. Okay, they're gonna be pouring the Oktoberfest. Um, this presentation is a bunch of comparison beers. Some of them are dry and dry. Some of them are dry and liquid. Some beers are just I like. How is dry yeast produced? Just a little bit about that. Pitching rates. It's always fun when you do a presentation, and I would encourage if you haven't done one to do it because you go back and you revisit something that you think you know, and you learn a little bit more about it. And I realized, oh yeah, pitching rates. I'm a little lackadaisical about that.
We have a question about the beers.
Just tell people you're pouring the Oktoberfest blue, and you're pouring the Oktoberfest orange. Well, that might just be sloppy writing.
It's probably an O.
Yes. Yeah, man. See, there's your. Yes. You know what? I'm. You guys are getting a pay cut. So yes. So maybe. So when these are poured, they're blue and orange.
I'm just a conspiracy theorist. I believe in Q.
Well, the other side's it, but well, that's a different story. No, God no. Scratch that. We're going to edit this film. Okay, so you'll see that these are blue and orange painter's tape, and so I would just say keep your glasses in that orange or in that order, so you know whatever you're drinking. We'll talk about what the yeasts are. Back to rehydrate or not. Who is using it, and a few tips from pros. So information sources, everything. Oh, closer to me? Okay. It sounded great to me. Thanks, Lauren. But everything always goes back to when I first started homebrewing, and it's the joy of homebrewing. So I read that thing a couple of times the first couple of years. 80 Classic Styles, Yeast and How to Brew, 2 different books by John Palmer. Brewing Better Beer by Gordon Strong, Homebrewing Guide by Dave Miller, an online article from Brewer World from Lalamond, and then David Heath on Dry Yeast YouTube video. Those are most of the sources I use. So comparison beers. We're going to have tonight Oktoberfest with 3470 and White Labs 820, which is their Oktoberfest beer. The 3470 is not actually an Oktoberfest, but it's the yeast I use for almost all my lagers, unless I'm really trying to go to a style. Porter US 04. Ooh, that's a typo. That should just be SO4. And White Labs 002. Those are both British ale yeasts. The Hazy IPA, Cellar Science Hazy, and the Dry 066, which is London Fog, which I've used in the liquid format quite a bit. I'm really happy with that dry. We'll talk a little bit about Cellar Science. Their background's a little hazy to me. West Coast IPA, Dry and Liquid, White Labs, West Coast or California Ale Yeast 001. So that was the one beer that didn't make the cut because we had so many darn beers tonight was the Kopbooser. And I brewed that with Köln, which we had the Köln yeast earlier, and White Labs 029, which is, they call that both the German ale yeast and also the Kolsch yeast. You know, they both finished out really close. Tasting wise, you'll just have to trust me that they both tasted pretty much the same. I couldn't tell the difference. So, flavor wise, you know, I would say using the dry yeast is just a little bit easier. You don't have to worry about it. It can sit in your fridge for a long time. Okay, so how is dry yeast produced? And the Lalamond article was really cool. I was hoping to pair up with Lalamond for this, but it turns out that professionals often don't respond to emails or calls. So when they're growing yeast, their goal is to produce a lot of yeast. They're not trying to produce the alcohol. And they had something, I think it was molasses was one of the foods they used. They talked about all the quality control. And I think that if you're buying professional yeast, it is so extremely rare that you're going to get a bad batch. It can happen, and it probably does, but I think most of the time, if you have a bad problem with the yeast, it's probably the brewer at home that's causing that problem. Odds are. No guarantees. They do 24 quality checks. DNA, viable cells per gram, wild yeast detection, and Lallemand says it's a 2-year shelf life. So that's pretty cool. I mean, I buy dry yeast and throw it in the fridge in case the fermentation's not quite doing what I want it to do. I'm like, oh crap, throw some dry yeast on it. We'll talk about that. And then that came from Brewer World. If you want to see more or actually read a really good article, check out, just Google Brewer World. What does it take to produce great quality dried yeast? And the little diagram talks about it. It's when it gets to the drying aspect and the packaging. That's got to be such high sanitation at that time frame. So I think everybody's got their beers. So we're going to talk about the Oktoberfest. You could see that 3470, the German lager yeast, and the Oktoberfest, they both finished out at the same. I fermented them both at 50 degrees. That's been my go-to fermentation temperature for lagers, and we'll see a little bit later about that. So with the, I don't remember which one's which, but fortunately I left the piece of paper that had everything telling me which one was which at home, and we called up my mother-in-law who was in the backyard, in a guest house in our backyard, and I'm like, I should clarify that. Yeah, she learned how to take a picture and text it for the first time ever tonight. So I'm like, Jan, yes, let's hear it for Jan. Yeah. Okay, so I know what's what, but let's get some feedback from you guys. Anybody got any thoughts on the differences, similarities, preferences? Andy, I know you came and tried them both at my house, so you don't get to talk. Yeah, your lips are sealed. Anyway, who sang that song? Yeah, you couldn't help it. The Go-Go's, good job. You can still talk. Anybody thoughts on them? Ryan, let's get you a microphone. Say again? Your Team Orange. Okay. Your Team Orange. How come you like the orange better than the blue? No, I'm not asking for a vote. I'm asking him why he liked that one better. We'll get to the part who likes which one better.
Yeah, I think Kurt and I agree. Drier.
Orange is a little less astringent than the other. The other one has a little chalky astringent.
Okay, I could.
Less fruity.
Less fruity. I kind of thought on my end, well, I shouldn't say, I'll let other people keep talking, but I know, and I know Andy, if you want to, Andy, which ones did you like? I'll tell you later.
I want to make sure I know which one is orange and which is blue, but the one that I think is the orange one of them is it's got a lot more esters in it, and so it's fruitier, and I don't like that as much for the Oktoberfest because I think it's just a little bit over the top on that. And the other one is drier or cleaner, I think, finish, and I think that's the blue one, but it's that one seems to me like it's the 3470, the clean flavor that you get from that.
Which one would you say is maltier of those two?
Yeah, I would say the orange one is maltier, but also there's a lot of esters with it, fruitier.
Yeah,
which is.
So,
I was looking for something a little cleaner. on
Yeah.
the Oktoberfest,
And
which
they-
is why I like the 3470 better, even though maybe it didn't have the malt character that I would expect for the Oktoberfest.
And I just had a commercial 6-pack that happened to be a BevMo, and I'm like, oh look, here's their Oktoberfest, and that thing was so malty, and I was like, I can't drink this, so I gave it to my wife. She loved it. So is there, if we had to see a show of hands for orange being preferred? Yeah, it's too many to count because I'm wearing shoes today. Normally I have sandals and I can count that high. Okay, how about blue? That's really close. Maybe I should have counted. Orange is the 3470 and blue is the Oktoberfest from White Labs. And it was pretty much split down. I mean, you guys can't see it because I can tell you that it was split down the middle. The flavors have changed. Andy, you were there right when I first kegged them. It is. It's lager. I mean, it's been in kegs and hanging out for, well, I brewed this the 16th. I kegged it sometime around probably about the 20th, 25th of August. And, flavors change over time. Nope, I'll put that down. We're going to move on to the next slide. Yes, questions?
The question was which one does Andy think is clearer? He says orange. Maybe.
Okay, so let's do this. For the next 3 beers that get poured, make sure that the orange are on your left hand and the blues on your right hand, just to keep them straight.
But that's not
Oh, you got to change them.
but
Okay.
that's not alphabetical order.
Oh, okay, sorry. Orange, you glad you're here?
We're engineers, damn it.
I have more of a comment than a question. I fermented 3470 under pressure up to 15 psi, and it performs very, very well under pressure versus the White Labs 820 does not.
Oh, cool. That's good to hear. And the Mexican lager that I made was from a brewery that's defunct, but Grant from that brewery was doing his Mexican lagers under pressure. And he's like, yeah, I knocked them out about 68 degrees with a lager yeast in a week. It's like, cool. He showed me his recipe. Like, oh, here it is. Super nice guy. Okay. Oops. I think that's this thing upside down because that's the wrong direction. One of the things I learned during this was 3470 and 820. They both have a little bit warmer recommended fermentation temperatures than I normally do. And you can do what works for you, but you could also evaluate it and go, hey, I've been doing something at 50 degrees and it works for me and I'm happy with it, but I might get a better product at 53 degrees or 55 degrees. So I can tell you that next time I brew something with 3470, I'm going to bump the temperature up and see if I follow the manufacturer's recommended guidelines, if I get a better product. But then again, I might not like it, and I'll just go back to 50 degrees. So the joys of being a home brewer. So homemade dry yeast. But let's get on to our second pour. We got a lot of pours. So homemade dry yeast has been around for a long time. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole looking at this, reading different historical stuff. The Quebec yeast, those have been around for a long time. And Norway has yeast logs and rings where they would pack that with the yeast and let it dry, and they would use it. And I've also read stories like they had their magic spoon where they would have to swirl that around. Now, you could pack those with yeast and let them dry and store them and reuse them. The bottom left of the rings, that is sheep vertebrae that was historically used for drying yeast and repropagating yeast in malt beverages. Okay, so just remember, you got orange and blue, however you want to handle it. Another way for homemade dry yeast historically was taking that yeast, mixing it with flour, and doing essentially unleavened bread, crackers, letting it dry, and then storing it, and then using that, pitching that into your wort. Um, I found one other person who did it, and we're gonna skip that one. How to do it yourself? How to make dry yeast at home? Somebody had asked me, "Can you do this?" Yes, you can. But most importantly, if you were to add up the time that you spend brewing a beer, do you want to risk your homemade yeast versus White Labs or Lalaman or Fermentus or whoever? I don't know. I will tell you that in early 2024, I will dry some yeast at home, and then I'll make a beer with it so we can see if I can keep it clean. So if you're going to do dry yeast at home, obviously the most important thing you can do is to sanitize it, right? You can then gather your yeast. You can, if it's an ale, you can just scoop some of it during fermentation off the top using a very fine sieve. Let it kind of drain out. And I had the gentleman's name, I think it was David Heath. His video was pretty cool to watch. He didn't take any super great precautions when he was drying it. He just had it in a Tupperware container with a lid kind of loosely on at a slight angle so dust didn't get in there. Place it on parchment paper, let it dry, crumble it up and save it. That bottom right-hand corner is just a little snapshot off his presentation of some dry yeast that he was storing. Another way to dry it, your oven could be a pretty sanitary place. Run it up to 300 degrees, let it hang out there, kill whatever's hanging out dust-wise in there. Let it cool down because that would obviously be too hot for the yeast. Put it on parchment paper, let it dry, fold it, crumble, and then store. So I will do this, and we'll see if we can figure out a difference. Andy?
Okay. So in the old days, the reasoning was always that, the reason why liquid yeast was preferred over dry yeast was because there were a lot of dry yeast strains or liquid yeast strains that couldn't be dried out. And so I'm wondering if with this, if you're saying, well, maybe you want to do this with some of the yeast that was formerly dry yeast that's now liquid because you fermented with it. And not something that was like maybe a strain that always came in liquid that maybe couldn't be dried out. I'm wondering.
That's a really good question, and we would probably need to get Chris White here. But they broke out London Fog 066. We don't know how many. Did they have a bunch of attempts at trying to take some of their liquid strains and make them dry? But from talking with Lisa at Carlsbad Brew Supply, White Labs is planning on doing like 4 strains a year, liquid stuff normally, and providing it in dry. So they definitely don't do it like this, nor like this. No sheep vertebrae are harmed or used at White Labs. I'm confident to say that without asking them. I'm kind of thinking London Fog turned out really well. I was happy with it. There was some other stuff I wasn't happy with, but I think that was more on me. I think the yeast itself, the dry yeast London Fog is great. I mean, and the beauty of it, you buy that dry package, you just throw it in your fridge and forget about it till you're like, Derek, the last day it expires, you use it. It worked. I liked your beer, Derek. So, okay, everybody's got the porter. This was SO4 and White Labs 002. Both yeasts that I've used for a long time, and I actually prefer them in general over USO5 and 001. I like the flavors that they bring. The SO4 finished at 1015, just slightly below the 002, and they were both fermented at 65. Now, all of the White Lab stuff is their, bless you. I think it's their next gen but it's essentially the double. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. The bigger packages. So one packet of dry yeast versus the double size on the next gen. I fermented this out at 65, and I can tell you that I had 10 fermenters going in my garage at one point. It was a pain in the butt to do temperature control, but I did it because I think that's, you got your ingredients, your water quality, and then temperature control for the big things in affecting how your beer turns out. So of these two, what do we got? Thoughts, preferences? Andy, I know you're dying to talk. No, you can talk. You haven't had this one yet.
This time I know I didn't screw up the order. I like the blue one better. I think it's, first of all, the base beer is really good. I mean, I really like the aromatics that are coming off on it. So good job on that. But the blue one for me is a little bit smoother finish, a little creamier maybe. I get a little bit of a chalkiness on the orange one on the finish.
Okay. And the orange one's a little bit drier.
A little bit drier. Could be the dryness. Doesn't look like it's too much dry, but yeah. But so I like the blue one better.
For the record, I did not have my reading glasses on when I was reading this with my hydrometer, but that's another story, courtesy of LASIK. Anybody else out there? Okay. I mean, you like the blue better, John?
Just say the orange has got a nice ester finish that I feel pairs well with the porter, but at the same time, it's right at the end. It's really, really nice. I'm not sure what orange was fermented with, but I like it a lot too.
But wait, you'll find out.
Okay.
And the one thing about beers, there's a reason why you go into a brewery and there's a dozen beers or 18 or 20 beers on tap. And you go to another brewery and there's just that many. Everybody has their own palate, their own preferences. And the funny thing about this base beer is it started off as a clone of Mammoth Brewing Company's Double Nut Brown. And I'm like, man, I think this is a porter, but they called it Double Nut Brown. So I entered it as a nut brown or brown ale. And the judge is like, really good beer, but should be in the porter category. It's like, well, there goes $40 down the drain. I did learn something. And you know what? I really like the maltiness of this beer versus the roastiness beer. It's something I've made a half a dozen times, and happily, unlike some of my IPAs, it keeps coming back the same. So, okay, let's get into a show of hands. Who likes the, let's see how I have it on here, the orange one better? Okay, yeah, who likes the blue one better? Wow, this is like a very big difference. The orange was the SO4 dry yeast, and the blue was the White Labs 002. So you know what that means is tomorrow night I'm going to go home and do some cold brew coffee, and that's getting thrown on the orange one. Humor's where you find it. I think I'm funny, and if you don't. Okay, pitching rates for yeast. Oh, wait, there's questions. I'm sorry. No coffee. And if I had not left my book at home with the recipe, I could have told you what the recipes were, but it is. No, one of those is going to get coffee, the one that, the dry yeast. So, okay. Let's get into pitching rates for yeast. One of the questions some wise gentleman asked me is, do you change pitching rates based on your gravities? And the answer to that is yes. Well, wait. Let's pour another round. Yeah, I didn't want to forget about this. Yes, you got to work within your own limits in life. And I know that I wanted to space these beers out. So again, and thanks to those beer pouring volunteers. I just went to the back row and I'm like, can you two pour this one? And you two pour this one? And you two pour this? The back row it was. You sit in the back and you get in trouble. Okay. So pitching is interesting. The the White Labs 70 milliliter double packs. The new thing from White Labs that you think there'd be an economy of scale and that they would be barely more. White Labs making a killing off this. There's 150 billion cells per that label. That's a good number. But what does that mean, right? You read the package and hey, there's 150 billion cells. I mean, I had one person say, you only need one cell and you could grow it up. Like, well, yeah, but what if it mutates? You know what? I did not count these. I'm going to take White Labs. Wait a minute. White Labs better be careful. This could be a class action lawsuit if there's 149,999. But that's a different story. Okay. So the dry version of 001 recommends, this is the funny part, it recommends 0.5 to 1 grams per liter. The count per the packaging is 5 billion viable cells per gram. And at 11 grams, I can do that math for you. That's 55 billion viable cells. Now, if you go to their calculator and you just put in a beer at 1050, which is pretty much on the low end for calculators, usually they go from 1050 up. I mean, you can go lower than that. But at 1050, White Labs is telling you you should be pitching 2.2 grams. Well, there might be a typo up there. Anyway, the calculator's telling you you need to be pitching 2 packages for a 1050 beer. So it's worth checking out. Yeah, go 22 grams. That's the typo. Thank you, Andy. I find in life most of my errors and most of my computer problems happen between the keyboard and the chair. That seems to be
I
my
think that's
theme.
referred to as PEPCAT.
Yes.
It's a PEPCAT error.
Cellar Science Ale says, hey, 1 package of 12 grams for a regular beer. For a lager, throw in 2 packages. And that's just Cellar Science saying that. I mean, and that's just giving some, a lot of homebrew, I would say a lot of homebrew clubs are not quite dialed in on the details as much as a club called Society of Barley Engineers. And I played with the Lalaman calculator, and I used 1050, and for a volume, I used 5.5 gallons. I always use 5.5 gallons because my goal at the end of the brew day for a fermenter is 5.5 gallons, 5.5 gallons. Because when you're done fermenting that beer, you look at the bottom of your fermenter, and you might have a couple of inches of yeast, trub, etc. And when you're racking that beer, well, you're leaving that in the bottom, plus a little bit of beer, because you don't want to suck yeast in there. So I always use 5.5 gallons. The Diamond is a lager. I played with temperature at 50, 55, and 60. And you could just see that the recommended pitch rate for that yeast reduced as the temperature went up. That seems to be the theme. The Colne was the same way. The BRY 97, which is supposed to be their version of the Chico yeast, so another version of 001, and then Nottingham. And Nottingham is my go-to. If I have an ale that has a problem, I throw Nottingham on it. That stuff eats up everything. It's a really good yeast pack to just keep in the fridge for emergencies. So I would just say that next time you go to brew beer, maybe look at the calculator and see. I'll get right to you, sir. I do think that it's better from reading about it to overpitch than underpitch, but I do know one professional brewery that wants those esters in the wit beer they brew to be pronounced, so they underpitch their yeast. I thought that was interesting. There's a question from the man in the back corner.
So with the correlation between the rising temperature for the pitch and the less amount of grams needed, is that due to the reproduction or lag phase of the yeast life cycle?
I believe so, but the calculator did not provide that information. And the books, actually, and I did read the books looking to see if there was something talking about temperature and pitch rates, and nothing really, I couldn't find anything that addressed it. The only thing I found in the books that really addressed pitch rates was gravity. But I think you're right. I just think that the warmer it is, the more the yeast go off, and they're just going to reproduce faster. But you know, Lalamon's a pretty big company. They have a lot of people wearing white suits and working in very clean places. I'm going to take them at their word, and it will impact a little bit about what I do. But again, I probably tend to actually, according to the calculators, for the most part, I'm like, one packet per nail, that works. I did one packet for that Oktoberfest 3470. I did not do 2 packets in that. And the same with SO4. And we'll talk about how that got. Okay, so we got our beers going around. You get to enjoy it. Pitching rates continued. So how to brew John Palmer. In this one, less than 1.055. He's saying 50, 100, 10 billions. 1055 to 1065, it goes up. 1065, 1075, it's higher. The table went further. I didn't reproduce the whole thing. I figured that gets the point across. Oh, and that person pitching, that's Doc Ellis. If you don't know who Doc Ellis is, Todd Snyder wrote a song about him, but go read up on Doc Ellis. He's a very interesting guy. He's pitching.
Because it's pitching
He's
rates.
pitching. He pitched a no-hitter back in 1970. He also did it on LSD, but that's another story. Okay. Yes. Now, brewing classic styles, this is more where they didn't really get into the rates so much, but I noticed when I was reading that book, and not that I'm trying to sell that book, but if you've never made a beer style, it's a good place to start. You can do what you want from that point, but looking at the lagers, the 5% and the 9.4%, you could just see the difference. And that just addresses the higher the gravity is, the more you should be pitching. And keep that in mind. So the next time you go to make that big beer and you got 1 packet of dry yeast and you're thinking about it, go to the homebrew shop and get another packet or 2 of dry yeast. The same for ales. You could also do starters too, which is a little bit cost saving. It's just what's your time worth, how busy are you? So the hazy that was just poured, I think everybody's got the hazy. This was Verdant and Dry London Fog, so WLP 066. And for some reason, I thought Verdant was Verdant. But then I went and watched a YouTube video, and the brewer from Verdant Brewing in England said it was Verdant with his English accent. So I'm going to say that it's Verdant, not Verdant. But Verdant sounds so much cooler. Well, I thought it was a French brewery. I'm like, I found my favorite. Oh, well, no. Okay. So both of these are dry yeast. And I will tell you that I like both of these yeasts. I've used both of these multiple times in different beers, and I've been happy with them. I thought about doing 066 dry versus 066 liquid, which would probably be a little bit better of a comparison, but I didn't want 10 gallons of the same exact beer. I mean, just sorry, people. I cheesed out on the comparison a little bit because I wanted 2 different beers. So what do you guys think about this? Any thoughts on the different? Oh, Sean Daniels. Sean with the beard back there.
All right, so just smelling them, I actually liked blue a lot. There's just like a little bit of ester in there, but taste-wise, orange just had a better crisp finish, whereas blue is kind of rounded and it fell off. It's a little sweeter. I was like, man. So I prefer orange, I think, overall. Blue, definitely, I think, on the way.
Okay. Yeah.
I had a really, really hard time differentiating between the two of these. Of the beers that we've tasted, these seem to me to be the most similar. But I agree that maybe the orange is a little bit drier, which is kind of nice.
Okay. So I do. Oh, Andy. Andy has something to say. Where's Andy's headset?
Microphone's coming.
So I agree with Sean's assessment, but I like the blue one better because I do. He's saying the orange one is a little crisper, maybe a little drier, but I think for me it works better. The blue one works better to have that finish that's a little bit maltier, a little bit sweeter on the finish.
Okay.
Just personal preference, right?
Yeah, and my brewing, because normally with the hazy, I'm throwing the hops in, and then when I pull them out, I'm cold crashing and kegging. But with 10 fermenters, I had to do stuff in the order that I had it, so I had to pull the dry hops out. I can tell you in 10-gallon batch, this one had 9 ounces of Idaho Gem, which is supposed to give cherry flavors. I just happened to have 9 ounces left in the freezer, and I'm like, let's use this. And then in dry hopping, it had a little bit of Citra and some Columbus and one other hop, but I can't picture it right now. I want to say Centennial. Citra, Centennial, Columbus. That sounds right. 3 seeds. Like, what do I have in the freezer? Any other comments?
Which one of these finished drier do you remember? Do you know?
They finished the same.
Oh, there it is. It's right
And
there.
now here's the interesting thing. I have on my phone an email from Cellar Science, or actually More Beer, because I reached out to Cellar Science to go, hey, I'd like to talk to you about your yeast. And some of the stuff I found online made it really sound that Cellar Science is repackaging yeast. They're buying and they're not growing and manufacturing the yeast, that they're buying the yeast and having it either somebody else's, well, actually I read that they're repackaging it. So with that in mind, there's almost a possibility that, I doubt it because London Fog is way more expensive than the Cellar Science, but it really could be the same yeast. We don't know. And I followed up with an email and a phone call and didn't hear back from them. So I'll report one of these meetings if they ever get back to me. They'll probably Google this and see this presentation and flinch going, we don't know what Cellar Science is. I think we all have confidence that White Labs 001 is going to be the same pretty much every single time. But if somebody's repackaging yeast and their supplier can't come up with a hazy, they might be like, well, hey, this hazy over here is really good. That being said, I have 5 gallons of a Mexican lager with the Cellar Science Baja going in my fridge right now, and I'm happy with the hazy. I liked it. I would use it again. It's just that unknown. So I will report back. Okay. Okay. Yes, let's see a show of hands. Who liked orange better than blue? You're like a talk show host. Okay, I'm not going to count that number. It's not that many. Who liked the other one better? Who liked them both the same? A couple. Okay, who has it?
So I don't know if it's different, but pretty much everybody in the back picked the first one.
Yeah. I think there's some peer pressure going on back there.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just odd.
But, again, everybody has what they like. So the orange was Cellar Science Hazy, and the blue was White Labs Dried 066. So again, I did like the beer that it produced. I was happy with it. I mean, I think the yeast did a better job than. Again, I'm going to go back and revisit my beer formula or my water quality, I should say. Okay. So rehydration. This is the big. Yes, both of these were one package, and one package. All of them were one package sprinkled on top. After I aerate with like a little whisk, not a whisk, like a spatula attached to my drill, cordless drill. That's how I aerate, because I just run that for a while till bubbles are all the way to the bottom. I will get you a video of that, or bring it in here and show you. But you know what? It works. I've never had a problem with it, I think. So rehydration, let's keep this going. But wait, there's one more beer to go. Yes. Thank you for the volunteers. So a couple things come off the top, like why rehydrate? I should take off the word potentially before the less stress, because according to John Palmer, it's a lot less stress. He says that, and actually Gordon Strong and Dave Miller, they all say that pitching direct without rehydration is really stressing out the yeast. Higher gravity beers, I would rehydrate. So, that's kind of where I take it. But why pitch direct? When you rehydrate, and we'll go through the steps of that, you are adding a potential contamination point. You don't have to trust the pours, just look at what they're holding, folks. So another reason for pitching direct, it's one less step on that brew day. You're not in there in your kitchen trying to check the temperature of that water before you drop the yeast into it. And the last one is it's less liquid added to the fermenter. Now, some of the instructions I saw for rehydration talked about using wort, hopped wort to do it. And other stuff, Dave Miller's book says don't do that, use water. So also, these are books, not online, so who knows how old they are. Maybe they've changed their mind. I did not reach out to John Palmer, but I'll email him. I am a fan of less liquid in the fermenter that's not beer flavored. And when I do a liquid starter, I tended to now decant a bunch of that stuff and let the yeast settle out so that I'm not pitching a bunch of liquid in there. Because on most of my beers that I want clear, I'm also doing gelatin to clear it up. So, if you think about it, the more stuff you add to your beer that's not beer flavored, the more you're changing that flavor. So the literature, rehydrate, yes, is Gordon Strong, John Palmer, Dave Miller. Manufacturers, White Lab says sprinkle. The Lallemand Cold, you read the label, sprinkle. Fermentis, another typo, SO4, not USO4. Those are sprinkle. Cellar Science, pitch direct, or if at higher gravity, rehydrate. I will say that, I'll get right to you. When I did email Cellar Science, more beer responded to my email. So again, questions. We need to get a microphone over for, here, Justin. Oh, you got a microphone.
I got one.
Justin, what do you got?
My question is with rehydration, I often use Go Firm, which I don't even know if it does anything, but it seems like it does something. It seems like you can tell if your yeast is active.
I found one of those books said Go Firm was a good idea. It didn't say it was mandatory, and nothing's actually mandatory, but it did say Go Firm is a good idea. Okay, you got to go buy some Go Firm now. Again, if you want to make the best beer possible, I would actually say rehydrate. I mean, keep your sanitation and do it. We'll get you a microphone in 1 second there, Rich.
Very simple. What is Go Firm?
Go Firm is a product that helps the yeast during the rehydration. So yeast, there's certain things they need, and there's certain things they don't need. It seems like with dry yeast that they have everything they need from water, but Go Firm will give them a little bit extra nutrients. The same way we had some presentations, and I think Chris Bank was passing around zinc at one of our big brew days. Zinc being a nutrient that liquid yeast often need. So, let's hold this backwards. Man, I keep on pushing the buttons and nothing's happening. Oh, I turned it off, thank you. So all the literature I've read with dry yeast says you don't need a starter. Now, if you intentionally want to grow it to build more yeast, you can, but everything I've read says don't worry about starters with dry yeast. Ryan has something to add.
So you keep talking about gravity. What about pH?
pH came up in absolutely zero of the literature.
Okay.
I never read once about pH in beer and pitching rates.
Okay.
That's a good question.
I mean, if you're trying to re-ferment a sour ale in a bottle,
yeah,
pH is a huge factor.
Man, you're blowing my mind right now. Oh, wait for the microphone, sir.
The gravity of the beer. So let's say you have a higher gravity, like say you're pitching like 1.085 versus 1.05. dry yeast, should you pitch more? Or-
Yes, and you'll
And is there a formula for that?
you know, the calculators. If you go to online calculators, so whatever yeast that whatever the manufacturer is, they'll have a calculator that you can use, but they're all pretty much the same. And I think a lot of it is probably those higher gravities are killing yeast cells.
Right.
Because the higher sugars are stressing the cell walls when they're trying to absorb it.
The one experience that I had this last time when I used the sap ale yeast or the dry yeast, first time I used it, and I was brewing a high gravity beer. It was 1.081, and with White Labs they tell you have to pitch at more yeast cells per gallon. Right? This when I pitched when I was looking and researching for the dry yeast, it didn't have anything specific for the gravity. It had just the rate per gallon. So I made a mistake of guessing how much more yeast cells to pitch, and I over pitched and had a very violent fermentation.
So violent fermentations, I actually have some splatters on my ceiling in my office from Nottingham. I'm a big fan of violent fermentations, but an interesting thing is when that happens, and if you're using a blow-off tube, you're losing volume too. A couple of times when it was getting a little crazy, I went in with anti-foam stuff and dropped some of that in there, and that helped. Because I've ended up short. I'm like, hey, I should have a lot more volume here, but I'm like, oh yeah, that blow-off tube. I lost all this stuff coming out, probably and a lot of yeast. We're getting a battery there. I was going to try to go back to that page that showed the different ABVs. Like a 1081, you're looking at what, a 9% beer, 10% beer. And if you look at that, the Brewing Classic styles, whatever from Janus, you'll see in that higher ABV that flat out, they're telling you to pitch a bunch more. And they don't get in. Now, that's also Zanishev and Palmer. And Palmer's one I refer to in the books who had that table, and he was running through his table with pitch rates. So, obviously his pitch rates in his books influenced that other book, but the calculators show that same thing. Andy.
Yeah, so is the pitch rate different for each yeast? I mean, I think I saw that on the Lalaman when you showed that for a different yeast it might be different depending on that yeast.
Man, that's like a softball setup question. I love it. Thank you. So yeah, the Lalaman calculator definitely said choose the yeast that you want, and they're telling you the pitch rates. I can tell you that I probably should have explored that on the White Labs. I just happened to go to the 001 California Ale yeast, and I didn't look at other versions on there. When I got to the Lalaman one, I was like, oh, well, I know that yeast. So I just started playing with them. So I think it does differ. I think yeast have different characteristics. Well, I shouldn't say I think. Yeast have different characteristics. I can state that for a fact. And we find that as brewers by choosing out which yeast do we like to brew with. Let's keep rolling here. So rehydration. So Palmer is a very technical person, and he has a very technical way of doing it. 10 milliliters per gram. Well, an 11-gram packet of yeast is about 4 ounces or a half a cup. He says get sterile tap water at 95 to 105, sprinkle the yeast, wait 15 minutes, stir, then stir again and wait 5 minutes, and then slowly, in his book, slowly adjust the temperature so that you're within 15 degrees of whatever you're pitching into the wort. And then pitch that creamy yeast in the wort. Now, the challenge of that is when you're pitching that is how do you get it all out of that container? It's, so I will say that the slowly adjusted pitch temperature, a practice that I've had for a long time is on brew days. When I start to brew is when I pull the yeast out of the refrigerator, whether it's dry or liquid, and I let that come up to my garage temperature. So it's going to be close at that point to like 5 hours later or 7 hours later if I'm running two systems. but it's going to be close to whatever that is. The 15 degrees I thought was a neat little goal, but so for Menace on SO4, theirs was a little simpler. 10 times its weight again. It's a quarter, 4 ounces, half a cup, quarter pint, I guess. Let it rest 15, 30 minutes, gently stir and pitch. And again, when you're stirring it, you're going to want to make sure that whatever you're stirring with it is being sanitized. So I did a little bit of brewer research. I reached out to some pro brewers and I asked them and I also asked them if I could use their name for this presentation. They all were gracious enough to provide information and say yes. Barrel and stave, I forgot to type in the direct pitch, but using Verdant 3470 for hazes and lagers and direct pitch, no rehydration. 5 suits, 3470, direct pitch for lagers. Battle Mage, Verdant 3470, direct pitch, hazy and lagers. So I did, when I was at Battle Mage, I meant to do a lot more research on this, but I got busy going to breweries and drinking beers and talking to brewers. It's a fun part about doing a presentation. But I did get, hey, make sure you soak the scissors, and actually I'm stealing thunder from a previous, future slide, but you want to sanitize your scissors and sanitize that package. I mean, shoots, the refrigerator that I throw my yeast into is, it can use help. So pro tips, refrigerate your yeast. Even though they say that the dry yeast can sit out, refrigerate it. I'd say keep on hand yeast. If you ever have a problem, pitch it. Dry yeast, with those cell counts, Nottingham, it'll eat up most everything. Use the calculators. It's one more tool. Sanitation's critical. Sanitize that. So that takes us to the West Coast IPA. So this was the California ale yeast, dry and liquid. Now, dry, I pitched, according to that label, I pitched 55 billion cells. Liquid, I pitched 150 billion cells. They both finished at 10.09 and came in at 7.61%. They fermented at 68. I mean, I let it ramp up to 70 at the end of fermentation. But that was the goal, was holding it at 68. And so, any thoughts on differences? The gentleman in the back corner to make Andre walk all the way back there.
Get my steps in.
I felt like blue was way crisper, way cleaner.
Okay, blue is that's a thought for liking blue.
It says WLP004 Cali ale yeast. Is that not 001? Oh, that's a fancy one. I'm sorry. I'm not
Wait,
fancy.
weren't you the one that couldn't figure out if my zero was
I'm
a
not
Q?
fancy enough. I'm sorry.
Okay, now we know who's.
I apologize. From way back here and being 45, that looks like a 4.
Amen.
So that's White Labs logo, so blame them, not Sean.
No, you can blame me. I'm just going to tell you what. So I've had a lot of friends who are older than me in different clubs, and they always said, Sean, someday you're going to turn 40, you're going to need glasses. And I'm like, no, I'll just squint. Okay, so finally I was around 50. I got LASIK. So, Patrick, either get LASIK, get glasses, or move up the table next time. Those are your options.
It's a pretty poor logo design.
You look like ZZ Top with those glasses. Okay. Any other thoughts on the Jacques?
Hang on.
How to upset the club president.
Sorry, Mr. President. These two for me are probably the most closely related tastes. I can't discern any difference whatsoever. No finish difference, no dryness difference, and maybe I have an untrained palate, but these two taste completely the same.
Yeah, and in a perfect world, we would have had 3 glasses, and you would have had 2 of one of the other. If it was Brewosophy, that's how he would have rolled with it. But I wasn't going to bring 2 growlers and of one and another growler of another because I do have to have some beer at home. Andy, you have a microphone.
I got a microphone. I don't know why they keep giving it to me. They keep. So I must have got a different pour than everybody else because I was thinking that orange is much crisper, and the flavors just really pop out of it, and I got this sort of like muddied ester flavor out of blue that I didn't feel was quite on target. So I felt like the orange had a better fermentation out there. It's crisper. It had everything that I wanted out of the beer. Okay.
And I should add that when I keg these, I try to put the same amount of wort in each keg, typically about a 1/4 inch below the gas dip tube in a corny keg. And then I flush all that headspace out, and then 10 psi, or actually I slightly did a little bit less because I didn't want to overcarbonate, so I did not 10, I did 30 psi at 9 minutes. Then I put it on tap at the pressures I want, and I pull and I drink off it for like 5 days to a week at the right pressure. I'm taking one for the team to get that properly carbonated. So I guess I'm here for you guys, but the point is I let it go for a while, and I try to get the carbonation the same so that it's really, that's how I normally do it, but I wanted to make sure that one wasn't overcarbonated. Because they are different. There's different cell counts. The gentleman with the microphone.
Okay, so there's a dry yeast technique that wasn't mentioned, which is the hybrid, and that is Guy Next Door's technique. And what he does is he sanitizes his fermenter, then he dumps the dry yeast into the fermenter, then he transfers the wort onto the dry yeast and swirls it around as it's filling up. So he's not really sprinkling it, but he's not really rehydrating. It's a hybrid of the two. And I have a beer that is fermenting right now with the Stellar Science Baja. I'm doing a Modelo Especial Cologne. So it is fermenting very nicely with only one packet of Baja. So I will bring that next month and we will try it out.
Excellent. And that's, it all depends at what point do you aerate, if you do aerate. For me, I'm taking that ginormous spatula on a cordless grill and whipping up that fermenter and that wort to get air all the way to the bottom. I don't want to beat up the yeast when I'm doing it. So for me, I was just sprinkling across the top. But that was a technique that I did come across where somebody said, hey, put a little wort in the bottom, sprinkle the yeast on the wort, and then rack the rest of the wort onto it or transfer it. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Probably the most important thing is to try to stay sanitary as much as you can.
So I kind of do a similar thing, but I take about half the wort, then pitch the dry yeast on top of it, then rack the rest of it onto it. So at that point, I'm still getting some aeration from the flow that I'm getting, and I'm kind of putting it in earlier than just floating it on top. So what's interesting is that Lallemand on the back of their packages actually says to rehydrate, but a lot of the literature and stuff you found online says you don't necessarily need to rehydrate. So it's kind of a...
I would look at the different Lallemand packages.
The ones that I've seen so far have all said to rehydrate.
Yeah.
So yeah, it may be different on it.
Yeah, and I was also going to websites, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, when all is said and done, we can agonize over every little detail, but if you're happy with the beer you're making, it kind of begs the question of why change, unless you want to just make better beers. Okay, so just so we can get out of here before they kick us out, let's see a show of hands who liked the blue better. Okay, we're gonna count this one for the heck of it. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, 10 and a half. We like the orange better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Who thought they were the same? Okay, well, guess what? They're the same beer. The big difference would just be the pitching rate. Oh, is that a question or are you voting?
So I have a packet here of this White Labs 001 dry ale yeast, which is produced by Lalamond in Austria.
That's funny as hell. Oh, whoops, I said out loud. Yeah, guess what? Anyway, getting back to the voting, the orange was the liquid, the blue was the dry, and so the orange had approximately three times the cell count. So yeah, the liquid had 3 times the cell count. They both finished out the same, which I thought was interesting. Okay, a cleaner fermentation. And if I was using their calculator, that would have been a much higher pitch rate than what I pitched for the dry. So I imagine that if you pitch that dry at a higher one, I'm guessing it probably would have finished a little bit drier. I mean, that much yeast, because it finished the same at a third of the amount. But who knows? An experiment for another time. So again, just a quick summary. Rehydration, it's an option, not a requirement. I used to always do it. I'll probably go back to it unless I'm feeling rushed. Sometimes I'm running 2 brew systems at the same time. If I'm running 2 brew systems, a Grainfather and then a 10-gallon thing, I'm not rehydrating. I'm just pitching because that's a busy day. I think we can all agree that dry yeast doesn't have the stigma that it once had. I mean, the London Fog was great. The Verdant was great. I love it. 3470. I mean, we didn't know how good it was until we had a great presentation all about lagers from Bierstadt. And then calculators and math are useful, but as Charlie Papazian says, relax, don't worry, have a home brew. Hopefully he didn't trademark that. He's going to try to charge me for using that. Thanks to the pros who shared their thoughts, and thanks to most of that back row who poured all those beers. So with that, are there any more? Oh, wait. Well, we're not done. The last slide is any more questions and comments. Chris.
So just a few comments from the pro perspective. Practicality-wise, dry yeast is great because I can get that on my pallet with my grain from DSG or order it from More Beer Pro, get it delivered, not have to worry about it. White Labs, it's convenient having them in town and we don't have to pay shipping, but you have to have someone drive down there, pick it up, and get it right back to the brewery in the cold box. And it's within a couple of days of brewing. So it's always a decision if that's worthwhile for the liquid yeast. Dry yeast is definitely easier. For the lager yeast, you'd need a ton of liquid yeast, and so you pay a fortune for that. And W3470 is very reasonably priced, and you can get that easily. And it performs very well. So that's a really easy choice, and I think a lot of the pro brewers are using that for that reason. For the Verdant yeast that I've recently switched to, I brewed 6 batches of the same beer, and my final gravities were between 1.9 and 3.1 Plato using the 066 liquid yeast. And so that got pretty frustrating having the ABV all over the place. And so I decided to give up on the White Labs liquid 066 and switch over to the Verdant. Fairly new, but so far it's been consistent and where I expected. US05 is another one that's fairly reasonably priced and is a good performer and easy to work with. White Labs recently started offering their dry yeast, and I looked at it, and it's actually priced about 10% more than the liquid yeast. So you'd think that would be more reasonable, more in line with the other companies. It's actually more expensive, And as we just heard, it looks like they're actually contracting it through Lallemand. So that's really interesting.
Cool.
So that's not particularly attractive, other than if you wanted to keep an emergency pitch around. And there's also a lot of variation. You know, that Verdant isn't particularly cheap, but it's still about 2/3 the price of the liquid equivalent. But it's twice as much as some of the other companies. Just a few thoughts from my perspective working with these yeast as a pro brewer.
No, thank you, Chris. And I would just throw out the idea: go check out Cellar Science and see about their version of like the USO5. I mean, essentially, USO5 has always been conveyed to me as a Chico yeast, the same as the White Labs 001 or the BRY 97 that was up there. Cellar Science seems to have really, really good prices. In fact, that Baja yeast or the hazy yeast, I think it was the Baja yeast, it was like $4. It was a smoking price. I was like, what? But anyway, thank you for your input because it is valued. I think we all recognize that you know what you're doing, and it's appreciated. Okay, any other questions? Ryan, you find something else that you want to share with us? Thanks. With that, drink well and prosper. Thank you all.